Oh, I don't think there's any question that from all the power companies that feel very strongly that it happened in Canada, whether it was somebody that did something wrong or a piece of equipment that failed.
The mayor of New York is wrong on that aspect.
We believe, the best information I have, is it started somewhere in the Midwest and then cascaded across Ontario and into New York and into Connecticut and into New Jersey, but I don't think anyone has an answer to that at this point.
Tell me, have you ever seen the United States take blame for anything? This is no different.
Meow, Huples cat. I do apologise for our former mayor, Mel Lastman, and his somewhat anti-American diatribe there, but he kind of had a point. Pataki was correct. It was actually an American human error that led to the Great Blackout of August 14, 2003. And again, I'm going to focus on some of that information because it's actually the real experience of people that went through a temporary SHTF. Now, first off, I want to talk about New York very briefly. How do you escape from New York? Some people say it's just not possible. Everything's possible. As with all of these talks on bug out or get home, it's basically the same idea. You want to go from A to B, and B is safe and has supplies. Whether that's a bug out location or a family, friends, or your own home. You want to go somewhere that is safe than where you are and has supplies. So what exactly are you going to do if, say, you're in the middle of Manhattan on holiday? What are you going to do? What everybody did was they went for the pedestrian bridges and they went for the ferry terminals. The subway system was out.
New York in the midst of a huge and crushing blackout, heading for the shoreline and ferry boats home at the street scene in 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, right outside our headquarters. No traffic lights, 6th Avenue is left to become a pedestrian mall. Those commuters wanting to get home are crowding to the shoreline if the Hudson River is their route. This is not the result of any kind of terroristic act.
Buses, cars basically couldn't move. People with bicycles couldn't really cycle on them because of the amount of pedestrians on the roadway. So what do you actually do in those situations? Well, one of the things I would suggest you do is, if you're able to very early on that you know there's a problem, if you don't have a bicycle for each member of your party, go to one of the depots where they actually have on-street renting of bicycles and see if you can rent one. Chances are, if there's a blackout, you won't be able to get one, but give it a go. If you're a long way from home, consider going to a second-hand store or a bike store and just buying bicycles with cash. Remember, ATMs and Visa machines will be down. So you should have sufficient local currency to deal with any emergency. 2 or 3 nights hotel accommodation might make the big difference to your party in terms of comfort, rather than having to sleep on the street. Yep, people had to sleep on the street in the blackout 2003 because there's no way they could physically walk home, and some of them smartly thought, I'm not walking 20 miles in this heat with that amount of people.
Otherwise, a whole lot of hotel and motel reservations in the New York metropolitan area tonight, and all those areas affected.
Cars mostly use gasoline, and mostly they run out of gasoline, and mostly in most SHTFs you'll find that you can't get gasoline. So again, you might want to consider running the car with more gasoline in the tank than most people do.
We're still trying to catch up on their sleep today. No one has fond memories of the last 24 hours.
And for those with cars, getting gasoline has been a big challenge today. At stations like this one at Lakeshore and Bathurst, the lineups have been long all day. As you can see, they continue right now. The Rogers AT&T Global News chopper on the scene. In many cases, the lines are backed up onto the street.
But even if you do, you still might find that driving is too slow or not possible out of the area, especially if everybody else is evacuating.
This was the scene in New York City. After the power went out, thousands of people simply decided to start walking. With traffic lights out, some pedestrians directed traffic. Those on the ground reported frustration but no panic. In fact, some New Yorkers treated the inconvenience with good humor. The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
As I said before, you want a small portable radio. Don't rely on the cell phone to make sure that you can actually hear radio stations, because even local ones in a really terrible SHTF probably will be able to get on the air and do some broadcasting, at least in the early phase, no matter what the issue is. If you're visiting or live in New York, make sure you know where all the bridges are. I mean, make sure you know where all the bridges are. This includes the transit bridges. You want to make sure that you've physically gone there and walked there and seen if it's possible to get access to those bridges. Remember that everybody else is going to be on the roadway bridges, they're all going to be on the pedestrian bridges, that's where everybody's going to be. If there's specific trail bridges, I think there is now one in New York that actually is for hiking and cycling.
It would go from New York City to the North Country, from Albany to Buffalo. Just think about it.
As well as completing the Empire State Trail.
And I think that's the Empire Trail. You might want to go down there early and get access and use that. You might find it very congested. What you won't find congested, at least initially, are the railway and transit bridges. Now, it is risky to access them, and it might be illegal to access them, but it will give you a huge jump on getting out of Manhattan if you can access a way out that few or hardly anybody else is using. In fact, what I would suggest is if you've scoped this out in advance, as if you know that that particular bridge is going to be a good way to get out, when you meet people en route, talk to them. Don't stop and talk to them, but talk to them. Say, you trying to get off Manhattan? Say, yes, I know a way out. The more of you there are, the less likely there is to be problems with the police, though the police are going to be pretty busy. As I've said before, if you've got a car, get out early and make sure you have sufficient gas and make sure you have supplies in the car, and don't mess around waiting to leave. The longer you leave it, even a couple of minutes, it's going to make a huge difference in whether you get home safely or not, or how long it's going to take. Buses won't operate for very long. Streetcars in Toronto won't operate at all. They're dependent on mains. Our subway system in Toronto is dependent on mains electricity without backup. So you might find yourself stuck in a subway. Listen to the guards, get out as fast as you can. In terms of tunnels, I'd be very loath to put myself in a tunnel in any SHTF scenario. However, if you know that it's a blackout and you know it's caused by a power trip, you might feel comfortable enough to use a tunnel system to get out of Manhattan. For people who live and work in Manhattan, you can get a 35-pound inflatable kayak called the Sea Eagle, and that, if the conditions are good and you're actually competent to use it and have a life jacket with you, actually could be a quite simple way of getting out. Bear in mind, boat travels can be very heavy, especially around the ferry terminals. If you are forced to take routes that other people are going to take to get home, this is what you'd be faced with.
Thursday's massive power hit paralyzed the city. The evening commute lasted all night, with thousands forced to sleep on the street.
Long, dangerous, hot conditions. Make sure you have some snacks, make sure you have cash, make sure you have water, make sure you have comfortable shoes and socks, make sure you have trousers on, make sure you have a head covering if it's the summer or the winter. When you go downtown, or if you live downtown, if you have to evacuate, make sure that you've got comfortable, appropriate footwear and clothing to do so. You might look beautiful at the opera, but if you then have to walk 25 miles home, you're not going to be very happy at your decision to wear high heels. I'm just going to switch to Toronto. Toronto devolved into traffic chaos almost immediately. Our drivers at the best of times are terrible, don't know the basic road rules. So it was very hard to get around. It did clear out eventually, mostly because people couldn't really drive because there was no gasoline available. One of the things Toronto did really early on, I know it happened in New York and Cleveland and a few other places, is that local people got on the streets, stood in the intersections and went,
Hundreds of unhappy travelers spent the night on the airport floor, and some were still trying to catch up on their sleep today.
And the people of Toronto have once again stepped up to the challenge with the greatest spirit that I've ever seen in any city.
The mayor of Toronto says he's proud of everyone after a power outage that sent our city into total darkness, in some cases for 7 hours, in other cases all night.
But nothing could dampen the spirits of our Toronto. I am so proud of the people directing traffic and helping others.
Not enough cops to do that. They were kind of busy trying to get people out of elevators and do other things. If you do decide to stay in place, it might be sensible in certain situations. Like it might be sensible in certain situations. You're going to have to figure that one out. Make sure that one of the first acts you do if you are going to stay is to fill up every container, including bathtubs, with fresh water. Taps will run out of water as power fails. It's going to depend on where it is. Some areas do have gravity fed that won't run out for a long time. Other areas will run out within 3 hours. Assume, if you don't know your area, that's going to happen to you, and fill up your bathtubs, fill up everything you've got that can hold fresh water. And if you're going to bug out straight away, Spend the first 5 minutes making sure the shoes, the socks, extra underwear, extra tops, stuff in case you're stuck at night. You know, take sheets from the hotel room if you need to. Make sure you've got enough water, and you can't have too much water. It's going to be heavy. So you want to drink 1 to 2 litres of water, 2 to 3 pints of water before you set out. And when you set out on the bug out, go slow for the first hour. Don't rush. Everybody else is going to be full of adrenaline, as will you. Don't rush. If you've got a multi-hour or even a multi-day hike ahead of you, or even a bike ahead of you, the first hour, get used to the movement. Take it easy. If you're walking on roads and it's safe to do so, alternate which side of the road you're on so the camber's not bothering you, and if it's safe, walk down the middle of the road. If you are absolutely having to walk a long distance, treat it as something that you need to do as fast as possible during the entire journey. The faster you go at the beginning, the slower you will go at the end. I can guarantee you that, especially if you're not fit. People will do crazy things. Like she said, she met a couple of guys going to LaGuardia because they'd heard a rumour that the ATMs were working, they had no cash. Of course, nobody's taking credit cards because the power's out.
Brian, it's not often that we come to you via cell phone, but there have been so many glitches in communication today. You see everybody walking down the streets, Times Square, Midtown Manhattan, everywhere, trying to make phone calls. It took us over an hour just to get one signal through. We also know that ATM machines aren't working throughout New York, and we learned a story from 2 men who said they were planning to walk all the way to LaGuardia Airport because they've heard that ATMs work at LaGuardia. We also know that there are people streaming out of Manhattan, walking across the bridges, of course, an image that was reminiscent of 9/11. But for the most part, Brian, people are really taking it in stride.
So if you want a can of Coke that's now going to be quite hot and quite hot quickly, you're in a lot of trouble. What happened in Toronto is people were pretty generous. A lot of the grocery stores actually allowed people to take stuff on an honor system, and largely people came back and paid because they were grateful at what was given to them.
There's no bread. And the water, they just pulled a bit more water out, but they are running out.
Again, depending on the circumstances, this is a sudden unexplained nuclear war, or an asteroid strike in South America or Africa that we know about that's caused power disruption. Don't expect people to be generous, don't expect stores to be open, don't expect people to give you lifts, don't expect people to be polite, don't expect people to act rationally. Wherever you live, make sure you know the trail routes, ATV routes and snowmobile routes in Canada and probably parts of the States. Know the routes that people use and can be used to evacuate out of downtown cores that other people won't take. People will take the main thoroughfares. In Toronto, it's quite easy. There's a lot of back ways that go through small parks, go back of buildings, and actually go through car parks. You can actually do that. But you need to have done it in advance. This is not the time to try and figure out how to go from A to B safely, because you'll end up on the sidewalks with thousands upon thousands of people in a desperate state. And this may or may not be something that you want to put yourself and your family through.
If you are in an area that has been designated an evacuation zone, either in New York City or on Long Island, people should take it seriously and they should evacuate early, not late. That is their citizens' responsibility.
Order mandating evacuation of Zone A areas. I'm also ordering that all of the city's public schools be closed on Monday.
I would argue a mass evacuation, this would not be the time after the leaders have said evacuate to try and hire a car or try and rent a car. You might want to try that route, especially if you've got really real problems with mobility, but it's going to be a long lineup, it's going to be very expensive, it's going to be very hard to do. Again, being a prepper, anticipation is everything. You knew Ida was forming, you knew Ida might be a threat. That would be the time if you needed to hire a vehicle, you'd have hired one. That would have been the time that if you needed to bug out, you'd have bugged out a good 24 to 48 hours before landfall. A lot of people actually are going to wait to the day of landfall or right up to the moment of impact before they actually feel able to move. And that's sad. You're a prepper, so you don't allow your emotions and your human instinct to trap you in a situation when you know you should have left. You can always go back later on. There was hardly any cell phone use in 2003. Okay, there was quite a bit of cell phone use, but it wasn't that every single person had a cell phone and lived on them. Now, really expecting a major calamity, cell phones to crash and crash badly very early on. It's definitely going to happen. The system will get overloaded. Quite soon, in fact, depending on the nature of the blackout, the police may actually get the cell phone services to be stopped so they can restrict the use only for essential service use. That's something that I would anticipate. So again, if the party you're with is in a strange town or even the town you live in, make sure people know if something bad happens, I want you to go back home as fast as possible. Don't hesitate. Or I want you, if you can't get back home, I want you to go to Uncle Jerry's house, or I want you to go to the park. Give people specifics of where to go. Assume they're going to go there. If they don't, evacuate yourself. This is not the time to be driving around cities and towns trying to find family members who are too witless and clueless to self-evacuate. Of course, again, I do apologize that if you do have dependents who aren't able to do this, I can quite see why it's an essential part of your plan to pick them up and evacuate them by car. I would strongly advise you do that as soon as possible. You're going to have to do this 2 or 3 times a year just in case you need to do it for real. When the writing's on the wall, this is not the time to enact those plans. When you see a vague shadow of it happening, evacuate them by car. You've got to get in, you've got to get out before the pedestrians, before the vehicles clog the roadways. Well, that's about it for me. I might do a 4th video where I talk about the bikes and show the bikes and talk about a few things. Fortunately, pretty much all of my prepping stuff is in storage because I'm moving to a bug out location for retirement. I'll be living there in my home. But you do need to know the local trails, both foot and bike, snowmobile and kayak in your area. My co-workers got me this and a couple of other books when I retired. That was nice of me. And we're going out for drinks in a couple of days, and yeah, MU's coming and it's not here yet, so I'm going to take advantage and I'm going to do a couple of things in the next couple of weeks, knowing that I probably won't be able to after that for a couple of months, because I think we're going to have to lock down again. And as ever, I'll be locking down before the government tells me to. So that's it. Give me a thumbs up, it's good for my ego. Give me a sub if you like this stuff, though I will warn you, my channel's a little eclectic and existential at times. Have a great week. Don't panic about this stuff, but have plans. Figure out what you're going to do. Don't be a slave to a mob. Don't wonder what you're going to do. Know what to do and do it. Mobs are great. Mobs in 2003 decided to party off for a few days and drink beer and have fun and barbecue and share everything. Mobs may not take that line. Mobs can be dangerous. Don't allow a mob or circumstances to think for you. You're smart. You're intelligent. Well, most of you are. Get out there. Figure out where and how you're going to get off. It's very glib to say use a railway line out of Manhattan. Can you get on it? A lot of areas actually have pipes connecting islands to the mainland. Figure out where they are. Those you probably are going to need to swim or cut barbed wire to get access to. But it may be a way out that nobody else is going to think about until later on. Make sure that you have plans. And when you've bugged out or when you've got home, make sure you know what you're going to do next. Make sure you know what you're going to be able to do next. And it's going to be very situation and luck dependent. Have a great week. Don't panic about all this stuff. Don't get caught up in the paranoia that's online right now. World's pretty good. Life's pretty good. Yeah, we have some challenges. Let's deal with them like adults. Toodles. This was a Wolfie Terrier in the Dark production 2021.